Hi, my name is Corin, and when I was 17, my parents dropped me off at a hospital and vanished. They left a single sentence behind. He has no future, no hug, no explanation, just the back of their car shrinking down the road, and me, sitting there on freezing concrete, waiting for someone to come back. But no one did, except one man, an old doctor. He placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "If you'll let me, I'll take you home." I thought he was saving me, but I didn't know he was the reason they let me go. So ask yourself, what if the person who rescued you was the one who destroyed you first? And what if you finally had the chance to burn it all down? Would you take it? I still remember that smell. The sharp sting of antiseptic mixed with the sweetness of rain on cold pavement. It was late autumn, somewhere around 5 in the evening, and the Illinois sky looked bruised, purple fading into gray. My parents were quiet the whole drive, and that silence had weight. It pressed against my chest like a hand I couldn't push away. Mom sat in the front seat, staring out the window, her nails tapping the handle of her purse in a rhythm that made no sense. Dad drove, his jaw tight. Every few minutes he cleared his throat, like he wanted to say something but decided against it. I thought we were going for my regular checkup. I'd been feeling weak for a while, dizzy sometimes, tired even when I slept all day, but it wasn't anything new. They told me it was because of some genetic issue I'd had since birth. I believed them. At 17, you don't question your parents. When we pulled up to the hospital, I noticed Dad parked far from the main entrance, near the service ramp. It was raining lightly, but he didn't seem to care. "Go ahead, Corin," he said, eyes still on the wheel. "We'll meet you inside after we park." I nodded and stepped out, tightening my jacket around me. My sneakers squeaked against the wet asphalt. The wind cut through the air, sharp enough to make my eyes water. I walked toward the entrance, then realized I'd forgotten my backpack. Turning back, I saw their car still idling. The red brake lights glowed faintly through the drizzle. I waved. Dad's head moved slightly. Maybe toward me, or maybe he was checking the mirror. A minute passed, then 2. Then the car rolled forward. "Hey!" I shouted, jogging a few steps. The tires hissed against the wet road, and then they were gone. Just like that. No horn, no look back. Just gone. I stood there, frozen. My hand was still halfway up in a wave. I laughed a little, thinking maybe they'd circle around. Maybe it was a parking thing. The kind of laugh that sounds more like a cough. The automatic doors hissed open beside me, and a nurse stepped out, holding an umbrella. She looked young, kind, the type who probably hummed while folding laundry. "Corin, right?" she asked. "Your parents left this for you." She handed me an envelope. My name was on it in my mother's handwriting. Tight, neat loops. The kind she used for grocery lists and birthday cards. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded twice. I unfolded it slowly, like my hands already knew something my mind refused to accept. It said, "You have no future. The doctors will take care of you." That was it. No love, Mom and Dad. No explanation, just that line. I stared at it until the ink began to blur. My mouth felt dry, but my palms were slick with rain. The world around me seemed to narrow. Cars, lights, voices, all fading into a dull hum. The nurse was still standing there, unsure whether to speak. Do you want to come inside, honey?" she asked softly. I nodded, but my legs didn't move. The steps in front of the hospital looked impossibly wide, like the distance between who I was and what I was about to become. I sat down right there, on the cold stone steps, the letter still open in my hand. Raindrops hit the ink, spreading the words into tiny blue rivers. It didn't make sense. Maybe they meant something else. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe they were coming back after getting gas or fixing the car. Parents don't just leave. But time kept moving, even when I didn't. The parking lot emptied, one car after another. The sky got darker. My reflection in the glass doors looked smaller than I remembered. I don't know how long I sat there. An hour, maybe 2. The nurse went back inside. The janitor mopped the floor behind the glass. A security guard gave me a look but didn't come out. I guess a quiet kid sitting in the rain wasn't a threat. The cold began to settle deep into my bones. I pulled my jacket tighter, holding the envelope under it, close to my chest like it could still mean something. Every car that turned into the lot made me lift my head. Every time, it wasn't them. Eventually, I stopped expecting it. That's the funny thing about waiting. You start to fear the sound of hope. When the drizzle turned heavier, I finally stood up. My knees cracked. My fingers were numb. I walked toward the glass doors again, but before I reached them, someone spoke. "Are you waiting for someone?" The voice was low, gentle, the kind that could stop a storm for a second. I turned. A man stood there, maybe in his 50s, wearing a white coat and holding a clipboard under one arm. His hair was silver, his glasses fogged from the rain. I couldn't answer. My throat tightened. I just stared at him, the letter still clutched in my fist. He walked closer, slow and steady, like he didn't want to scare me. Then he crouched down to my level. For a moment, I thought he'd ask me to leave, like everyone else did when they didn't know what to do with broken things. Instead, he placed a hand on my shoulder. It was warm, firm, grounding. "I can take you home," he said quietly, "if you'll let me." There was something about the way he said it. No pity, no hesitation, just certainty. I looked past him, toward the road where my parents' car had vanished. The rain blurred everything now. Streetlights, signs, the horizon itself. It felt like the world had erased its edges. I didn't nod. I didn't speak. But I didn't pull away either. He stood up, waited a moment, then held out his hand. The lights from the entrance flickered across his wedding ring. My body moved before my mind caught up. I reached out, fingers trembling, and took it. The wind howled once more, scattering a few leaves across the wet steps. Behind me, the automatic doors hissed open again, and the smell of disinfectant rushed out to meet the rain. I took one last look at the parking lot, the empty space where the car had been, and stepped forward. He didn't say much on the drive, neither did I. I sat quietly, watching the wipers push rain across the windshield in slow, steady arcs. The heater hummed low. The radio was off. For a long while, the only sound was the engine and the faint creak of leather when I shifted in my seat. We passed cornfields turning to mud, sleepy gas stations with flickering signs, and finally crossed into Wisconsin as the sky began to clear, bit by bit. It was dark by the time we pulled into his driveway. The house was modest, tucked back from the road with a porch light glowing soft amber. It looked like someone actually lived there, not just existed in it. Potted plants lined the steps. Wind chimes moved gently in the breeze. There was a blue ceramic bird on the windowsill, and I stared at it for longer than I should have. He parked, turned off the ignition, then glanced at me. "You can take your time. No rush." I opened the door and stepped out into the chill. It smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke. comforting in a way I wasn't ready for. Inside, the warmth hit me first, then the quiet. Not sterile hospital quiet, but home quiet. Rugs on wooden floors. A ticking clock somewhere deep in the house. "This way," he said, and led me to a small room at the end of the hall. The guest room. The bedspread was faded but clean. There was a bookshelf full of paperbacks. A framed photo of a boy about my age sat on the nightstand. Blonde, grinning, eyes sharp. I didn't ask. "I'll let you get some rest," the man said. "You're safe here. Bathroom's just across the hall." He left the door cracked. I didn't close it. I didn't sleep much. I laid on top of the covers, fully clothed, one arm under my head, staring at the ceiling. The shadows shifted with the wind. I kept waiting for something to happen, for someone to come back for me. But no one did. In the morning, light filtered through the curtains in thin golden lines. The air smelled faintly of toast. I sat up slowly, rubbing the stiffness from my shoulders, then padded out to the kitchen. He was there, flipping eggs in a pan like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Hope you're hungry," he said, without turning around. I hesitated, then sat. The table was set with mismatched plates, a chipped mug, and a jar of jam so old the label had peeled. He placed a plate in front of me. 2 eggs, toast, a few slices of apple. "Eat what you can," he said, pouring coffee into his mug. "You don't have to talk." I didn't, not much. Just nodded once, quietly muttered thanks. The food was plain but warm. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd eaten something made on a stove. We sat in silence, the kind that wasn't heavy. Just there. Eventually, I asked, "Why didn't you leave me at the hospital?" He stirred his coffee. "Because you didn't belong there." "But you don't even know me." He looked at me then. Really looked. "Sometimes you don't need to know everything to recognize a soul that's lost." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I didn't. After breakfast, I helped wash the dishes. He didn't ask, I just did it. There was something grounding in the warm water, the clink of ceramic. I guess I wanted to earn the space I was taking up. I didn't feel like I had a right to be comfortable yet. The rest of the day passed slow. He gave me space. I wandered through the house, careful not to touch too much. The walls were lined with photographs, mostly black and white. A younger Aldrich in a military uniform, a woman with warm eyes, and that same boy from the nightstand, again and again, always smiling, always vibrant. That evening, after helping bring in firewood, I lingered in the hallway a moment longer than usual. There was a door near the study that he always kept shut. I didn't try it, but my curiosity had teeth. Instead, I went back to the guest room. That photo still sat on the nightstand. I picked it up. Something in the boy's eyes felt familiar. The kind of familiarity that stings more than comforts. He must have been watching me from the hall, because suddenly Aldrich's voice came, soft. His name was Ethan. I turned. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, gaze steady, but tired. "What happened to him?" I asked. He paused. "Life took him too soon." That was all he said. Then, "Maybe you can help me fill the silence," he left. The words hung there, fragile and strange. I didn't know how to respond, again, so I nodded, just barely, and set the photo back down. Later, after dinner, he told me about enrolling me in the local school. "You'll need some routine. Structure helps." "Okay," I replied, though I wasn't sure how I felt about it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake for a long time, the house creaking around me like an old ship. At some point, I got up for a glass of water. I moved quiet, barefoot, As I passed the study, I heard something. A voice. I paused, heart suddenly in my throat. It was Aldrich, talking, but not on the phone. Not to himself exactly. I inched closer. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap I saw him sitting in an armchair, the light from a lamp casting long shadows. He held the photo of Ethan in his lap. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "He's here." I froze, not because of what he said, but how he said it. Like it mattered more than anything else in the world. Like bringing me here wasn't just kindness. It was a vow. A chill crept through me. I stepped back before he could notice me and slipped into my room. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling again. But it felt different this time. Like something had shifted. I wasn't sure if I'd been rescued or replaced. Morning light crawled across the ceiling, thin and pale. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Aldrich sitting there in the dark, whispering to that photograph like it could still hear him. The house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that hummed under your skin. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that grief makes people do strange things. Still, something about the way he said, "He's here," stayed stuck in my chest. 3 months had passed since that night. The snow had come early that year, turning Geneva Bay into a postcard town. White roofs, frozen lake, and smoke curling out of chimneys. People here smiled politely, but their eyes carried questions they didn't ask out loud. Aldrich called it a peaceful community. I called it a place where silence traveled faster than truth. He'd gotten me enrolled in the local high school. Small place, same faces every day. The teachers were kind enough, but the students, well, kindness isn't the same as acceptance. They whispered when I walked past. "That's him," I heard once. "The sick kid the old doctor brought home." At first, I tried to ignore it. Focused on homework, chores, shoveling the walkway before Aldrich woke up. He didn't ask me to. He never asked me to do anything, but I felt like I owed him. Gratitude became my morning ritual. If I stayed busy, I didn't have to think too hard about why he'd really brought me here. Aldrich treated me well. Too well, maybe. He made breakfast, packed lunch for me, checked my schedule like a parent who hadn't learned how to stop. But there were moments, small ones, where something flickered behind his calm eyes, like he was measuring me against someone else. One Saturday, I was helping clean his study. He'd gone out to the pharmacy, and I figured I'd surprise him by tidying up the stacks of papers that had started to pile on his desk. He was meticulous about his files, labeled everything in neat block letters, bills, journals, patient notes. Then I saw it. A manila folder tucked beneath a pile of old medical forms. My name was written across it. Corin Ward. My stomach tightened. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that. But I did. Inside was a single page. A medical report dated the year my parents left me at the hospital. The words jumped out like a slap. Result: no genetic abnormalities detected. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room tilted. My hands shook so hard the paper rattled. No disease. No future, they'd said. No disease. I dropped the folder back where I found it and stepped away, like distance could undo what I'd seen. When Aldrich came home, I watched him from across the kitchen table, his face calm as ever. He asked how my day had been, and I said fine. The lie stuck in my throat like a fish bone. I lasted until after dinner before I cracked. He was reading by the fire when I stood in the doorway, holding that folder like a weapon. "You knew," I said. He looked up slowly. "Knew what?" "That I wasn't sick." He closed the book, placed it on the side table, and sighed, long, weary, like he'd been waiting for this. "Sit down, Corin." "No." My voice came out sharper than I meant. "You knew, and you didn't tell me." He studied me for a moment, eyes soft but unreadable. "Knowing the truth too soon doesn't always save us," he said quietly. "Sometimes it breaks us." "That's not your choice," I snapped. "It's mine." The words echoed in the living room, bouncing off the framed photos and the ticking clock. I hadn't raised my voice like that in years. He didn't argue, just nodded slightly, like he understood something I didn't. That made me angrier. I grabbed my coat and walked out. The cold hit hard, biting through my sleeves. Snow fell in soft, relentless sheets, muffling the world. My boots crunched through it as I headed toward the lake. I walked until my breath came out in gasps, until my anger turned to something else, something heavier. Gratitude tangled with resentment. He'd given me warmth, food, safety, but at what cost? The reflection on the frozen water looked warped, like a stranger wearing my skin. By the time I got back, the lights in the house were dimmed. I hung my coat by the door and saw a letter sitting on the entry table, addressed to Dr. Aldrich Keene from some research institution in Chicago. The envelope was marked confidential. I didn't touch it. But the sight of that red stamp sent a pulse of unease through me. Later that night, I went back into the study. The folder with my name was still there, lying crooked now, a corner sticking out. I took the page, the one that said I wasn't sick, and carried it to the fireplace. The flames hissed when the paper caught. I watched the ink curl, turn black, and disappear. As it burned, I whispered to the empty room, "No future, huh? We'll see about that." The fire cracked, a single ember popping loose and rolling toward me like punctuation. I let it die out on its own. That night, I didn't feel broken. I felt awake. And when the morning came, I didn't roll over and pretend to sleep like I used to. I got up before the sun and moved quietly through the hallway. The rain had returned, not the cold, punishing drizzle of that night a year ago, but something gentler, like fingers tapping on glass. I stood at the kitchen window with a mug of black coffee in my hands, watching it bead along the frame. Something in me had shifted, like a lock tumbling loose after too many years stuck. I told Aldrich I'd clean the study while he headed to the clinic. "Be careful, it's damp out," he said, slipping his coat on, adjusting the collar the way he always did. "I'll be home before lunch." He smiled like nothing had changed. I smiled back, like everything hadn't. The house felt bigger when I was alone. Still, listening. I moved carefully through the study, dusting the shelves and reordering the books that had slid sideways over time. I'd done this before, plenty of times, but this time I wasn't just cleaning, I was looking. The bookshelf to the left of the window never sat flush against the wall. There was always a slight tilt. I figured it was the floor, the old foundation. But curiosity has a strange gravity, and I followed it without thinking. I pulled the shelf an inch forward, then another. Behind it, a narrow wooden panel with no handle, but a faint seam along the edge. I ran my fingers across it until one corner gave a soft click. A door. Not dramatic, just old. Quiet, hiding in plain sight. Inside were 2 shelves, each lined with files. Manila folders, some brittle with age. Dozens of them. Each labeled in Aldrich's hand, neat, medical, consistent. The first one I touched read, "Ethan Keene." I hesitated, then pulled it free. Inside, scans, blood work, lab reports, notes in a looping script, some typed, some handwritten, dates I didn't recognize, terms I didn't fully understand. At the bottom, paper clipped to the last page, was a picture. Ethan, about my age, maybe younger, dark eyes, quiet smile. The next folder bore my name, Corin Ward. I opened it slowly. The contents were almost identical, except this time, alongside the medical records, were documents bearing my parents' signatures. Consent forms, authorizations, participation in Phase 3 longitudinal genome integration study, underwritten by something called the Helix Foundation. My hands went cold. I kept reading. A note dated a year before my abandonment. Subject shows stable markers. Risk of cognitive impact, negligible. Recommendation, continue observational phase in controlled environment. Controlled environment. That night at the hospital wasn't chance. It was part of something larger, something planned. I closed the folder and leaned back on the carpet. The rain outside had picked up, steady and patient. I stared at the ceiling like it might offer answers. Later that night, after Aldrich had gone to bed, I put on my coat and walked to the public library. The place still used a computer system from the early 90s. Slow, humming loudly, but it was quiet, anonymous. The librarian nodded at me, more out of habit than interest. I typed Helix Foundation into the search bar. Most of the links were outdated, but buried under a local journal archive was an article from 1990. Gene Mapping Initiative Ends in Ethical Controversy. I opened it. The project had once promised breakthroughs in early disease detection, but its methods, particularly involving minors, had sparked legal and moral backlash. Lawsuits had been filed, funding withdrawn, and there it was, plain as day. Dr. Aldrich Keene, Principal Researcher. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. The man who made me eggs every morning, who showed me how to fix a leaky faucet, who kept fresh towels folded in the closet, he was part of it. The reason my parents thought I had no future. I walked home in the rain, my coat soaked through. I didn't feel the cold. Inside, the house was dark. The only sound came from the hallway clock, ticking a little too loud. I went back to the hidden shelf, pulled down one last folder. This one marked only confidential. Inside, a single letter. No signature, just one line, scrawled in fading ink. We can't undo what we did, but we can choose who we save next. Was it meant for Aldrich? Or for me? Or someone else lost to time? I didn't sleep that night. At breakfast, I sat across from him. He poured coffee like always. Buttered toast. Asked me if I needed a ride to school. I didn't answer right away. Then I said it. I found the files. He paused, hand hovering over the plate. I never lied to you, he said after a moment. I just didn't tell you everything. He looked up, meeting my eyes. There was no denial in his face, just something softer. He tapped the edge of his mug with his finger, once, twice. You're not the only one they left behind. Aldrich's words echoed in the silence between us, like something brittle, hanging in the air just long enough to make the coffee go cold in my hand. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask what he meant. Maybe I already knew. Or maybe I didn't want to know yet. The weeks after that morning unraveled slowly. I kept going to school, kept volunteering at the youth center down by the lake, pretending everything still made sense. Most days I walked home with my hands shoved deep into my jacket pockets, thinking about that locked shelf, the note, my mother's voice on that tape, all of it crowding into my head like smoke I couldn't cough out. Spring was coming, but the air was still sharp. Trees hadn't fully bloomed yet, like they were waiting for something that never arrived. Then came the fundraiser. Aldrich said it would be a simple gathering. Local families, board members from the hospital, Some city folks who'd driven in from Milwaukee to throw money around and drink wine with labels they couldn't pronounce. He asked me to come. "It's good for people to see you," he said. "They should know your face." I wore the only blazer I had. Still had the dry cleaner tag on it from 2 Christmases ago. We drove in silence. By the time we arrived, the clouds had thickened above us. Thunder rumbled somewhere behind the hills. The community center had been dressed up with white linens and warm lights, soft music humming in the background. People clinked glasses, exchanged polite laughter, made eye contact that lasted exactly 1 second too long before moving on. I tried to stay near the back, near the windows, pretending to read one of the posters about youth health initiatives. A tall man with slick hair and a smug grin tapped a spoon against his champagne glass and took the stage. "As always, we want to thank Dr. Keene for his continued commitment to the community," he said. "And of course, to his incredible generosity in providing care, mentorship, and even housing to some of our more experimental cases." Laughter, light, polite. And let's not forget his latest project, Corin, a real testament to what patience and science can achieve. Am I right? More laughter. Louder this time. I didn't move, didn't breathe. People glanced my way, then glanced away, just as fast, like I'd sprouted a second head. I felt the blood rising in my ears. My fists clenched at my sides. The only thing I could hear was the thunder pressing closer. Later, when most people had migrated to the bar or the buffet, Aldrich found me in the hallway near the coat racks. "They didn't mean it like that," he said quietly, trying to put a hand on my shoulder. "It was just a joke. You know how people—" "No," I cut him off. "Don't do that. Don't explain them away." His eyes flickered. "Corin, stop protecting them," I said louder. "And stop protecting me. You're all just pretending none of it happened. That I'm not the product of a lie." I didn't wait for his answer. I pushed past him and out the double doors, into the wet evening air. Rain had finally begun to fall. Not softly like the week before, but heavy, unapologetic. I walked, didn't care where, didn't care who saw me soaked to the bone, my hair plastered to my face. By the time I got home, I was shivering. But I didn't go to my room. I went to the study. The machine on the desk, the old one with the tapes Aldrich never threw away, was blinking red. Curiosity is a dangerous kind of hunger. I pressed play. The tape whirred, then clicked. And then her voice. My mother. Not the one from my memory. The one who used to braid her hair in the kitchen window light. This voice was tired, cold, almost bored. "He's your responsibility now. We did what we had to. I don't care what happens next." That was it. No pause, no stammer, no apology. I stared at the machine for what felt like hours. Then I yanked the cord from the wall, slammed it against the floor until the plastic cracked and splintered and sparks jumped from the outlet. It still wasn't enough. I kicked it across the room, let it rest there, broken like the rest of everything. I didn't cry. I'd stopped doing that a long time ago. Later that night, I sat at my desk, still in wet clothes, unable to feel my fingertips. A pile of folders, once hidden, was now burning in the fireplace. Pages curled and blackened one by one. I watched Aldrich from the hallway. He stood motionless, watching the fire consume his work. He didn't say a word, didn't ask me to stop. Except, he saved one. Mine. He placed it carefully on my desk and left the room. A note was tucked underneath. "The rest is yours to finish." I opened the folder. The final page had one line, a typed statement signed by Aldrich himself. Subject 47. Exhibits extraordinary resilience. Potential to surpass all projections. I stared at it, my heart thudding. Subject 47. That was me. The folder stayed on my desk for 2 days before I packed it into an old duffel and left the house for good. I didn't leave a note, didn't slam the door, just turned the knob, walked out, and didn't look back. There wasn't much left to say. A week later, I was in Chicago, renting a tiny room above a mechanic's garage that smelled like oil and cold metal. The bed frame creaked when I turned, and the paint on the windowsill peeled at the corners, but I had a lock, a roof, and silence. During the day, I worked at a coffee counter near the Loop. It wasn't much, but it kept cash in my pocket and gave me access to overheard conversations. At night, I spent hours hunched over library terminals and old city archives, combing through public records and scraps of digital ghosts tied to the Helix Foundation. It had gone dark in 2003. The trail was buried under vague lawsuits, redacted medical articles, and news clips about controversial gene studies. No clear explanations, just the same phrase over and over: ethical violations concerning minors. Then one name came up: Marla Foy, former nurse. Her name was scribbled in the corner of Aldrich's original notes, underlined twice. I found her living on the South Side, managing a second-hand store with cracked linoleum floors and bars on the windows. She was maybe in her late 50s, wore a heavy cardigan even though it was already 70 degrees out. She didn't recognize me when I walked in, but when I told her Aldrich Keene had been my guardian, her shoulders tensed like she'd swallowed glass. "You need to go," she said, eyes darting toward the door. "This isn't something you stir up." I didn't leave. I said, "They said I had no future. They were wrong." That made her stop. After a long silence, she pulled a set of keys from her pocket, opened a drawer beneath the register, and took out a flash drive. She hesitated before handing it over. "I never wanted to keep it," she muttered, "but I also couldn't throw it away." "What's on it?" I asked. "Confessions, meetings, sound files," she said. "Back when we thought we were doing something revolutionary." She looked me in the eye. "Back when we still thought we were saving lives." I asked if she'd known my parents. She flinched. "They signed you over like they were selling a used car. Some of them cried, most didn't." Her voice softened. "Aldrich was the only one who tried to stop it. Not in the beginning, but later. After Ethan died, he broke. He started pulling back. Then one night, he took your file, packed you up, and disappeared." I stood there, clutching the flash drive like it was ticking in my hand. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked. Marla's gaze didn't waver. "Because someone out there still wants this buried. If you plan to open that wound, make sure you can survive the bleeding." That night, back in my room above the garage, the air was thick with the scent of gasoline, and something burned from the shop below. I sat on the floor, plugged the flash drive into my laptop, and waited. There were 6 audio files, each labeled by date. The earliest one started in 1997. I clicked play. Static. Then voices. Clean. Clinical. Parental consent forms were collected. Risk is manageable if we stay under the radar. Then I heard a voice I hadn't expected. Aldrich's. "If we don't document this, they'll call it neglect. If we do, they'll call it cruelty." I paused the recording. My breath caught. I had to press my palm against the floor to keep from tipping over. That voice, calm, low, deliberate, was the same one that had offered me toast on my first morning in his home. The same voice that once whispered, "You're safe now." But here it was, entangled in something monstrous. I let the file continue. They talked about children, about genetic tracking, about long-term viability. Then I heard a name, mine. Subject 47, Corin, shows above average neural development, responsive, adaptive. Another voice chuckled. Maybe we finally got one right. I yanked the headphones off. The laptop screen dimmed slightly. My reflection stared back at me, older now, but still haunted. What do you do when the man who saved your life also helped break it? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I listened to every file, every syllable. I heard the laughter of men in lab coats. I heard the flat tone of bureaucrats discussing children like inventory. By sunrise, my chest felt like it held stones instead of lungs. One file remained. A video. I hovered over the play button for a while, then clicked. The footage opened with a flickering timestamp in the corner. 2003-311. A small white room, empty walls, fluorescent lights. And there I was, 10 years old, sitting cross-legged in a chair, holding a stuffed bear I didn't remember owning. I looked up at the camera and smiled. Behind the lens, a voice said, "Good boy, Corin. Say thank you to Dr. Keene." The boy on the screen looked directly at the camera. He waved and said, "Thank you, Dr. Keene." I closed the laptop gently, as if shutting it too hard might wake the ghosts inside it. The air in the room felt thick, like the past had walked in and sat beside me, uninvited. 3 days later, I got the call. A woman with a kind but distant voice said Dr. Aldrich Keene was ill, heart failure. "He's stable for now, but he keeps asking for you." I didn't respond. I just sat there, the phone still warm against my ear, thinking how strange it felt to be summoned back, not by guilt or obligation, but by the man himself. The bus ride to Geneva Bay was long and silent, interrupted only by the soft hiss of tires on pavement and the occasional coughing passenger. When we pulled into town, nothing had changed. The lake still shimmered under the early summer dusk. The same old bench by the bakery. The quiet church bell marking the hour like it always had. But the house felt different. The paint had faded, vines curling around the porch rails like tired fingers. Inside, the ticking of the grandfather clock filled the hallway, the same way it had when I was 17. But the silence that used to comfort me now felt hollow. I found Aldrich in the back room, the one that used to be his study. Now it was a makeshift bedroom. Medical monitors beeped faintly. A faint scent of antiseptic hung in the air. He looked smaller. His face was drawn, cheekbones sharp under sagging skin. But his eyes still held that same unsettling calm. "You came," he said, voice raspy. I nodded. "You called." He gestured weakly to the chair beside him. I sat. The rain tapped gently on the window behind him, like the first chapter replaying itself. But slower, softer. "You already know most of it," he began, staring at the ceiling. "But there's one thing I never told you. One thing I've carried longer than I should have." He coughed, reaching for water. I handed him the glass, trying not to look away. "You weren't chosen by chance, Corin. You were selected because of your markers, because of your resilience." My stomach nodded. "I thought Ethan was the answer," he whispered. "But when he died, I knew I had failed. Then came you, the last candidate, the one they labeled hopeless." He turned to me slowly, his eyes glassy. "They told me you were a lost cause. I wanted to prove them wrong. I didn't save you, Corin. I used you to save myself." It landed like a stone in my chest. I didn't cry for him. I cried for that boy in the video. The one who said thank you without knowing why he had to. There was no rage left in me, just clarity. I didn't need his apology. What I needed was to understand what that thank you had really meant, and who it had been meant for. We sat in silence, the kind that comes after storms, when the debris settles. Then Aldrich reached out, his hand trembling. The same hand that once rested on my shoulder that first morning, when he offered me scrambled eggs and said nothing about my parents. This time, I didn't pull away. I let him place it over mine. "You're not the same boy they gave me," he said, barely audible. "You're more." I could have walked away then, and maybe I should have, but something kept me rooted. Before I stood to leave, he whispered, "In my drawer, the paper, the one they left you." He nodded weakly toward the nightstand. I opened the drawer and found it, folded neatly in an old envelope. The original note from my parents, the one that had said, "No future." But now there was something on the back, a second message in Aldrich's handwriting. "Every future starts with a lie." I stood there for a long time, watching his chest rise and fall, slowly, like the tide. Then I stepped outside. The lake stretched out before me, calm as glass, dusk folding into night. I held the note in both hands and whispered into the stillness. "Then let's make this lie worth something." I tucked the note into my jacket pocket, the paper warm from my hand, as if it carried a pulse of its own. The sky above Geneva Bay had darkened to a quiet indigo. I stood there for a while, watching the last reflections of sunlight ripple across the lake, feeling the weight of everything that had been said and all that still needed saying. 2 weeks later, I heard about the charity gala. The invitation wasn't addressed to me, of course. It was printed on ivory cardstock, scripted in silver ink, and left out in plain sight on the community center bulletin board. Someone must have assumed I was long gone, or dead. It was to honor Dr. Aldrich Keene, a pioneer in compassionate medical research, the flyer said. That line alone made my throat tighten. The night of the event, Geneva Bay's community hall looked like something out of a catalog. String lights wrapped the banisters. Candles flickered from tables draped in navy linen. I arrived just before the first speech and stayed near the back, dressed in plain black, invisible among the suits and sequins. People mingled with drinks in hand, smiling with that curated warmth reserved for polite functions and donor wallets. I watched them, the doctors, the board members, the polished former colleagues. They toasted to legacy. They praised breakthroughs, words like integrity, vision, and unshakable moral compass echoed through the room like a bad joke no one realized was cruel. Then came the tribute video. A host in a navy blazer took the stage. "Tonight, we honor a man who gave his life to science," he said. "Let's take a look at his incredible journey." The projector clicked. The screen flickered. The crowd leaned forward. But it wasn't the tribute they expected. Instead of stock images and smiling interviews, the video opened with grainy footage from the Helix archive, a dimly lit lab, a boy, me, at age 10, sitting on a stool. A voice behind the camera said, "Good boy, Corin. Say thank you to Dr. Keene." Gasps rose in waves. Then came Aldrich's voice, older but clear. "If we don't document this, they'll call it neglect. If we do, they'll call it cruelty." The room went dead silent. I stepped forward. Each footfall echoed louder than the last until I reached the stage. I didn't rush. I didn't speak right away. I simply unfolded the yellowed no future paper and placed it on the podium. I looked out at the sea of faces, stunned, pale, some visibly trembling. And then I spoke. "That's what they told me," I said quietly, "that I had no future. But I'm standing here. That means I have one." No one moved. No one clapped. They just stared. Not at me, but at themselves, at their own reflection in the lie they'd chosen to believe. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth did all the shouting for me. You built a story around him, I continued, called it mercy, called it innovation. You wanted to believe he was a hero because it made you feel safe. But heroes don't need to lie to children. In the front row, Aldrich sat in a wheelchair, slouched slightly. His eyes didn't leave mine. There was no rage in them, only surrender. I didn't say his name again. I didn't have to. His voice had already filled the room. His truth was out. And once truth breathes, it doesn't crawl back into the dark. As I turned to leave, the room erupted, not in applause, but in voices, questions, accusations, shame. Outside, the air felt lighter. I walked down the steps, past a line of flickering lamps toward the street, when I heard footsteps rushing after me. "Wait!" a voice called out. It was Maria, Aldrich's longtime assistant. Her eyes were red. "You destroyed him." I stopped, turned slowly, and said the words I'd been carrying for years. No, I just stopped pretending he was still alive. Then I kept walking, past the parked cars, past the fountains, past the town that once thought I was a charity case. I stepped into the night, looked up at the sky, and whispered to no one in particular, "This time, I'm not running from the storm." And I didn't. I let the storm pass through me, let it shake loose the last pieces of who I used to be. And when it was done, when the noise settled and the fires cooled, I didn't collapse. I stood. The morning after, the headlines called it a scandal. I called it closure. Now, a year later, I call it peace. The clinic sits on the edge of a quiet street outside Madison. A white, two-story home with creaky steps and a mailbox that leans just a bit too far left. The paint is chipped in places. The coffee pot whistles like it's 70 years old. There's a wicker basket by the door, stuffed with knitted scarves no one really claims, but somehow always end up around someone's neck when the wind shifts cold. I work here now. We're not a hospital, not officially. We don't wear badges or lab coats, just warm flannel, denim, and the patience of people who've lived enough to understand silence better than speech. I talk to teens, ones who've been left behind, thrown out, given up on. Some come in yelling. Some don't say a word. All of them carry that look. I know that look, because I wore it too. My office is upstairs, small second-hand furniture, crooked blinds that catch the light just right in the morning. There's a wall covered with kids' drawings. Some are stick figures. Some are poems. One is just a smudge of red and black, signed Ellie. That one came later. The day she arrived, I was sorting through donation boxes, trying to find a chair that didn't wobble like a toddler on roller skates. I heard the front door open, slow, hesitant. A social worker stepped in first, then motioned behind her. The girl couldn't have been more than 13. Thin, pale, shoulders up to her ears, clutching a torn canvas bag like it was the only anchor she had left. "She won't speak," the social worker whispered. Parents dropped her at the ER, said she's troubled. Thought maybe you could. I didn't wait for the rest. I walked over, crouched down in front of her. I didn't ask questions, didn't push. I just stayed there, level with her eyes, and said, not really to her, more like to the boy I used to be, "If you'll let me, I'll take you home." She didn't move, but she looked up, and in that split second, I saw it. Not trust, not yet, but the first crack in the fear. And that was enough. Over the next few weeks, she came back. Always quiet, always guarded, but she kept returning. That's the thing about showing up. It teaches them how to do the same. One afternoon, I found a note on my desk. It was scrawled in thick marker, stuck next to the old paper I keep pinned to the wall, the one that once said, "No future." The "no" is crossed out now, replaced with a red line drawn by a girl who hadn't spoken yet. Next to it, Ellie's note said, "Thank you for giving us one." I stared at it for a long time. Not because I needed to read the words again. I'd memorized them the moment I saw them. But because I realized something I hadn't been ready to face. I had become what Aldrich tried to be. The difference? I didn't need to own anyone to save them. The radio hummed in the background that afternoon. Static crackling between stations. A news voice broke through mid-sentence. The Helix Medical Foundation has officially dissolved after continued pressure from ethics commissions. I reached over, turned the knob gently until the sound faded. Then I smiled. "Peace to the dead," I whispered. "Life to the living." Outside the window, kids were running across the grass. One of them tripped. The others laughed, helped him up, and kept going. Sunlight poured through the branches, casting soft shadows that danced across the clinic walls. I leaned back in my chair, let the silence stretch. Maybe the past didn't need to be buried. Maybe it just needed to be lived through, not as a weight, but as a root. They once said, I had no future, but maybe the future was always waiting for me, right here.